Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Absolute Beginner tutorial for Git and GitHub. Now, in this lesson, we are going to actually dive in and create our first GitHub repository. But before we go ahead, I'd like to take a little moment to explain you what version control is. Now, version control, also known as source control, is a technique of tracking and managing changes made to a software system. Version control systems are software tools that help software teams manage changes made to the source code over time. Version control softwares keep track of every modification you made to the code in a special kind of database. If a mistake is made, developers can turn back the clock and compare earlier versions of the code to help fix the mistake while minimizing disruption to all other team members. Now, I believe that you might have gotten a little bit of understanding of what version control is, but I believe that this diagram would make it more clear. So just imagine that you are working in a folder in a directory which is managed by Git. And by the way, this directory is what we actually call as a repository. So a repository is nothing but a folder or a directory which is managed by Git to track all the changes that are made within that folder. So Git is maintaining your project, and now one of the developers is you, who's making changes to this project by adding more features. As a result, you are creating version 1 of this project. At the same time, your fellow colleagues might be working on different features alongside as you are, and they might be creating version 2 and version 3 of the project. Now, all these versions of the same project are actually managed by Git into a same repository, and we can push our changes, we can pull our changes using Git commands that we will learn in a later lesson. So now we can move ahead and actually create our first repository so that we can learn all these concepts in practice. If you have not gotten the concepts by now, do not worry about it, just follow along and bear with me. So while we are practicing, you will get ample amount of repetition of adding these commands and these concepts. We'll revise them all again and again, and eventually you will get the grasp of it. So now let's go ahead and go to our github.com. And as you do so, you'll be clicking on this icon. You can navigate to your profile. On your profile tab, you can see in the top right corner, there's a plus icon. Let's click on that. It prompts for creating a new repository. Let's click on that. Now, there are a few options that it's asking you for. The first one being the repository name. Now, mind that the repository name has to be unique for your GitHub account across all the repositories. It cannot coincide with the names of other repositories that are there in your GitHub account. So for this lesson, I'm going to choose a name, learning-git. Now, as you see, it quickly checks for the name to be available in the repository or not. If the name is actually present and is part of the name of some other repository within the same account, it would show a cross icon in a red color saying that that name already exists and you cannot use that, because we cannot have two repositories in the same account by the same name. Now, as it's showing a tick mark with a green color, that means that I do not have this repository by this name, so we are good to go. Now, when you are creating your GitHub repository, there are two options. Either you can select that repository to be a public one or a private one. A public repository is a repository that anyone on GitHub can see when they navigate to your account. On the other hand, a private repository is more secret, that it's only visible to you, who's the owner of the project, and to all the members that you explicitly invite to contribute or collaborate to your project. Now, in this lesson, I'm going to keep things simple and I'm going to select the public repository, but later in the lessons, we will definitely choose private repositories and try out that as well. Now, it's also saying that initialize this repository with a README file. A README file is a special markdown file that is used to explain a little description about the project and the way you can start the project or bootstart the project. It is usually used to mention description of the project and the steps that you need to take so that you can run your project. To keep the process a little simple, I'm not going to use this, but in the later lessons, we will definitely dive into it as well. I'm going to leave the below two options as well for later lessons. And now just navigate quickly to this Create Repository button and click on it. As you do so, you will be prompted up with this page. Now, we are going to clone our repository from GitHub onto our local machine. How do we do so? There are two ways to it. The first one being the HTTPS method, the second one being the SSH method. The HTTP method is far more straightforward in case of public repositories, but we are going to go ahead with the SSH method because that is something that you are going to encounter in a production environment while you're working with a greater team in an office arrangement. For that to happen, we need to set up our systems before we actually move ahead with SSH because it requires a public and a private key pair to authenticate you with the project, and that is something that we are going to use later while we are working with the private repositories as well. So before we actually clone this repository, we need to go ahead and click on our profile icon, go to Settings. Under the Settings tab on the left hand side, you might be seeing SSH and GPG keys. Click on that. Now, you might not be having any SSH keys present in there, but I do have one, but let's ignore that. We are going to create a fresh SSH key as you would also do. Now, this process would be similar for Windows users and Mac users and Ubuntu users, with a slight difference for Windows users is that how we are generating the SSH key. So let's navigate into our terminals. Now the command that I'm going to write is not going to be liked by CMD for Windows users. So I'd suggest that you move to Git bash. Now a little reminder, when we installed Git as a tool on our machines, for Windows users, it might have also installed a terminal called Git bash. If you go ahead into the search bar on the bottom of your screens, in the search tab, and you type git bash, you would find it. I would suggest that you close CMD at this point and start working with git bash as it's a Linux based terminal and you would find the commands running more similar to what I'm doing over here. So the command that we are going to write is SSH-keygen. So when you type SSH-keygen, and we have to add -t and RSA, RSA being the signing method for generating the public and private keys. Hit enter. It's going to prompt you that where do you want to save the file. We're going to select the default location, keep hitting enter, and the file has been created. Now the path to this file would be different for Windows users. You probably would have to iterate to the path that is mentioned over here. Like for me, it's users-sing.ssh and id_rsa. The path would be different for Windows users. Just copy the path from there and copy this much path and write cd and paste the path over there and hit enter. Now we will be in the .ssh directory. Now just type ls to list down all the files. Now we can clearly see that we have made the id_rsa and the id_rsa.pub, with id_rsa being the private key for authentication and id_rsa being the .pub being the public key that we are going to supply to GitHub. To print the contents of this file, we're gonna have to write a command called as cat and then id_rsa.pub. When we hit enter, we're going to see this long string printed. Just copy the string from the SSH till the end of this file. Make sure you do not copy any extra spaces. Copy this file from here. Copy this text from here and then paste the text into your add new SSH key option. Now, in the title, you can say, I'm just going to say MacBook Pro 16. It's autofilling for me from the previous edition. You can name anything that you like to, and just add the SSH key. Once you add the key, you would see the key present over here, and we are good to go to clone our project onto our local machines. Now what we want to do is that click on the profile icon, click on your repositories, and now I have this learning Git repository up on the top. Click on that. We are again presented with the screen that we were being shown previously. Copy this command, make sure that you are on the SSH tab and it says git at GitHub and not HTTPS. So click on SSH, copy this, and then move to your terminal. I'm going to clear the terminal for now. Now move to whichever directory within which you want to clone this project. And when I say clone this project, what I really mean is that you are pulling the project from GitHub into your local machine. So for me, I have a workspace defined already. So I'm going to cd into my documents directory, into my workspaces directory, into my node workspace directory, which I have already created. You can also create such a directory. By the way, if you don't know the command, what you can do is that you can navigate to whichever folder or directory you want to work in. Let's say for me, it's documents and workspaces, hit enter. Now we are in the workspaces directory. What you can do is you can say mkdir and then the directory name. Or let's go ahead and create a fresh directory actually. So let's say mkdir git workspace. That is the directory name that I'm choosing for storing all the files or all the project that I'm just about to clone from GitHub, which is the learning Git directory. Hit enter. Now when you say ls, you would see git workspace directory mentioned over here. So you're going to say cd git workspace, and I'm pressing tab to autocomplete, by the way. Now we are in the git workspace directory. So here comes the first git command that we are going to use. What we are going to say is git clone and then paste the string that we just copied from GitHub. Make sure it's git at github.com and not HTTPS. Just hit enter. Now when you hit enter, it says cloning into learning Git. Now it says warning, you have appeared to cloned an empty repository, because again we did not add anything into our repository. But if you press ls, you would see that learning Git is a directory now present on your system. Let's quickly cd into learning Git. And now we are inside of our first repository. Okay, so we have created our first Git repository. We cloned the project or the Git repository onto our local machine, and we have successfully went inside the Git repository on our local machine. Now, in the next lesson, we are going to actually create files and folders within this repository and publish it back onto our GitHub account. So with that being said, let's catch up in the next video.